Flashing red and blue lights cut through the noise of the city as a police cruiser screeched to a stop in front of a black car. Doors slammed. Officers stormed out, their voices sharp, barking orders with the kind of arrogance that made everyone on the street pause. Coco Jones stepped out slowly, her movements calm, her face unreadable. Around her, a crowd gathered, whispering, filming, their eyes locked on the humiliating scene unfolding in broad daylight. The officers treated her like a criminal, their tone dripping with authority and disdain, eager to assert dominance. But Coco's silence was not weakness, it was control. Behind her steady gaze lay something none of them could imagine. The question hung heavy in the air. What happens when those abusing their badge cross paths with someone far more powerful than they realize? Coco Jones stepped out of her sleek black car with a calm, composed grace that immediately contrasted the aggressive energy of the officers surrounding her. She wore a fitted navy suit, her hair neatly pulled back, her presence polished yet unshaken by the chaos building around her. The two officers towered with smug expressions, their hands resting casually on their belts, as if they had already won whatever battle they imagined this to be. Their words were sharp, laced with condescension, as if humiliating her in front of a growing audience gave them satisfaction. Around them, people began to gather, drawn by the flashing lights and the escalating tone. Some whispered to one another. Others lifted their phones to record, eager to capture the drama. Every bystander could feel the imbalance of power. Watching a scene that looked all too familiar, yet something about Coco felt different. She did not plead, she did not flinch. Her eyes held steady. Her silence calculated, as though she knew a truth no one else yet understood. There was a quiet weight in her stance, a hidden authority waiting beneath the surface, foreshadowing that these officers were moments away from a reality they were not prepared to face. The tension thickened as one officer stepped closer, his voice sharp and commanding as he demanded Coco's ID. His partner echoed him, raising his tone louder than necessary, mocking her calm responses as if her composure was an insult. They leaned into their authority, their words dripping with arrogance, treating her not as a professional woman, but as someone beneath them. The louder they spoke, the more they tried to provoke her. Yet Coco remained still, her silence a shield they could not penetrate. The crowd shifted uneasily, whispers rolling through like a current. Some shook their heads at the display, while others muttered in agreement with the officers, convinced that compliance was the only option. A few onlookers even called out, telling Coco to just hand over her documents, unaware that she was choosing every moment of restraint deliberately. Her face remained unreadable, her breathing steady, her eyes locked on the officers with a quiet defiance that unsettled them, even as they tried to mask it with aggression. For the bystanders, it looked like an ordinary abuse of power playing out, but Coco carried herself differently. She wasn't intimidated, nor was she desperate to prove herself. In her silence there was strategy, in her stillness there was control. She knew exactly how this would end, and that certainty lingered like a spark waiting to ignite. Though no one in that crowd could yet see the fire that was about to break loose. One officer suddenly yanked Coco's bag from her shoulder, unzipping it with rough hands, as if searching for evidence of a crime that didn't exist. He tossed items onto the hood of the patrol car without care, scattering her belongings for the world to see. The other officer leaned close, accusing her of hiding something, his words sharp and cutting. They painted her as suspicious, dangerous even, twisting her calmness into guilt. When Coco quietly reached to gather her things, one of them shoved her hand away, the movement more aggressive than necessary. Gasps broke out from the crowd. A woman in the front covered her mouth, while a man stepped forward as if ready to intervene, but froze when the officer shot him a warning glare. Cell phones were raised higher, the red recording dots flashing like silent witnesses to the humiliation unfolding in the street. Some people muttered that this was going too far, yet no one crossed the invisible line of fear drawn by the officer's authority. The atmosphere pulsed with unease, each second more unbearable than the last. Through it all, Coco didn't shout, didn't raise her voice, didn't let anger betray her. Her stillness was louder than their rage, her dignity standing tall against their attempts to break it. She bent slowly to pick up one of her belongings, only to have the officer push it farther out of reach with his. It was meant to degrade her, to force her into submission, but she only straightened her back, her eyes steady and unshaken. The tension hung at its peak, the crowd waiting for her to crack or beg, but Coco gave them nothing. Her silence became unbearable for the officers. Her composure their greatest frustration. She could end this humiliation in a second, but she chose not to. She wasn't ready to reveal who she truly was. The power shift was coming, but only when she decided it was time. Beneath Coco's calm exterior lived a history carved from struggle and resilience. She had spent her life standing against injustice, choosing law as her weapon, when the world around her seemed determined to silence voices like hers. Years of long nights, endless battles in courtrooms, and the weight of representing those who had no power had forged her into more than just a lawyer. She had become a shield for the voiceless, a fighter whose greatest strength was not in loud defiance, but in the discipline of restraint. Even now, surrounded by humiliation, Coco's silence was not weakness, it was control. Every breath she took, every steady glance she gave, reminded her of the values that had carried her to the position of state attorney. Calmness in chaos, dignity in the face of insult, and a determination to let truth speak louder than anger. The officers saw only a woman they thought they could intimidate. Inside it lay something more powerful than any weapon, something that could turn the entire scene upside down with a single reveal. The crowd didn't know. The officers didn't know. Only Coco knew that the moment she chose to show them what rested inside, everything would change. For now, she simply waited. The breaking point came when one of the officers, face tight with arrogance, reached for his cuffs and yanked Coco's wrist in front of everyone. Gasps tore through the crowd as metal clicked open, the humiliating gesture meant to display power over her. But Coco did not flinch. Her eyes met his with a steady, calm, unblinking, unshaken. There was no pleading in her expression, no sign of fear, only quiet defiance that seemed to unsettle him more than if she had shouted back. Phones shot up from every angle as bystanders leaned in, recording with urgency. Whispers grew into a wave of outrage, but no one dared step between them. The air was electric, heavy with the weight of injustice playing out in real time. Yet, in the center of it all, Coco stood rooted in silence, her back straight, her presence commanding without a single word. The officer tugged harder, expecting resistance, but instead found himself confronted by an unexplainable composure. Her refusal to react, her ability to strip his intimidation of its power, made the scene feel almost inverted, like he was the one losing control while she remained in charge. And then came the question, lingering in every watching mind as they studied her calmness. What could possibly give her such unshaken confidence, when most would have broken under such public humiliation? Something about her silence promised that the answer, when revealed, would change everything. Coco's hand moved with deliberate calm as she reached into her purse. The officer holding her wrist sneered, expecting fear, maybe even desperation. But instead, she pulled out a small leather case and flipped it open with steady precision. The golden seal gleamed under the streetlights, bold and unmistakable. Her voice carried across the stunned silence, calm yet cutting through the chaos like a blade. "I am the state attorney," she said, every word laced with authority that could not be questioned. The crowd erupted in gasps, the phones now shaking as people realized what they were witnessing. The officers froze, their arrogance evaporating in an instant. The one who had tried to cuff her stumbled back, his hand hovering uselessly in the air, his face drained of color. The power dynamic flipped in a single heartbeat. The woman they mocked, searched, and tried to humiliate now stood as the highest-ranking official in the scene. Coco's gaze swept over them, not with rage, but with a quiet dominance that pressed heavier than any shout. The badge in her hand was more than a symbol. It was a reminder of justice, of consequence, of a truth they could no longer hide from. The silence was deafening, broken only by murmurs of disbelief from the crowd. In that moment, it was undeniable. The so-called helpless woman held all the power, and the officers were left stripped of theirs. The officers stumbled over their words, their once commanding voices reduced to nervous stammer. One tried to mumble an apology. Another lowered his gaze to the ground, unable to face the crowd that now looked at them with disgust. Their arrogance had evaporated, leaving only shame in its place. The bystanders who had moments ago stood frozen in fear erupted with cheers and shouts of support. Phones were raised higher, capturing every second of the dramatic reversal. Some even stepped closer, boldly confronting the officers, demanding answers for their behavior now that the truth was exposed. The power dynamic had flipped completely. Where the officers once stood towering with false authority, they now seemed small, stripped of every ounce of control. And at the center stood Coco, her posture straight, her presence unshaken. She did not gloat, did not raise her voice, did not seek revenge. Instead, her calm words carried more weight than any punishment could. Her quiet authority crushed their pride far more effectively than anger ever would. And in that silence, the lesson was clear. True power lies in dignity, not intimidation. Coco looked at the officers, and then at the crowd, her voice steady but filled with meaning. She reminded everyone that respect is not optional, it is the foundation of justice. Dignity is not something to be granted or taken away by uniforms or authority. It is a right every person carries within them. She told them that power without integrity will always collapse in the face of truth. The crowd listened in silence, absorbing every word. Some nodded, others lowered their phones, realizing they had just witnessed more than a confrontation. It was a lesson. Then Coco turned slightly toward the onlookers, her final words leaving an echo in the air. What would you have done if you were in Coco's place?